Hi! In the video that I made about placing modern parts on older frames or restoring vintage bicycles, I forgot to mention one thing, and that is the dropout, the fork dropout width. I will now address that and talk about some ways to fix that. I will put a link to that original video. Now I'll make it pop up someplace so you can look at it. I addressed most other things, but I have forgotten to mention this. And what it is about, modern bicycles and up to 50 years in the past have almost all, a vast majority, had this distance between the fork blades, the dropout width, the front dropout width of of exactly 100 millimeters or 10 centimeters. Some very latest, greatest boosted through axle front hubs and forks that use very wide, it's not an axle, but a very wide rod to hold it all in place, have a 110 millimeter dropout width. That's like still an exception, but 100 millimeters is more or less standard. However, on bicycles that are 60 years old or older, the further you go in the past, the more likely you are to encounter a fork that has only 90 millimeter or 9 centimeters dropout width. So a modern hub that is 100 millimeters wide between the locknuts will not fit. Here is what a hub looks like. I'll show it now. It's just a front hub. And modern cup and cone hubs have these like locknuts on the outside, on the outer edge, and there are locknuts of various thickness or width. So you can see here the difference between these two. If you are lucky enough to manage to source a front hub that has these locknuts wide enough, and you manage to source thinner ones so that you can make up for that 10 millimeter difference, then you can use those on your vintage bicycle and use such wheels. I do have various kinds of I do have locknuts of various thicknesses. Whenever I break some hub apart when it's toast, I save everything as spare parts, but they do not come like too thin, not like 1 millimeter thin. 2 millimeters is about the thinnest ones that I could find. Maybe just a little bit under that, but that's a bit exotic. So there's not much wiggle room, and as long sorry about my English, as long as you get to below 94 millimeters, it's usually not too bad. It would be perfect to get below 93 millimeter of the over locknut distance of the hub to fit into a 90 millimeter fork. Of course, perfect would be to get it to 90 millimeters, but that's, I have never managed to do it like that. I haven't had any hubs that could be shrunk so much. You cannot go too crazy because you need to have cones protruding outside, so you can use the cone wrench, and maybe you can machine one side, then cut off the excess axle which protrudes on the outside on quick release hubs, and that would be a topic for a separate video, how to hack, and it depends on hub to hub. So you need to be a bit creative, but sometimes you can make them effectively a bit narrower if you are lucky, if you find the right one with very thick locknuts, or with enough washers that you can just toss out and just put the locknuts at the ends. Okay, adjusting preload will be a bit more tricky in that case, probably, but you can get it to work. That would be one approach. Another approach would be to replace the fork. You can find even decades-old forks, like still looking classic and nice, but that have 100 millimeter width of their dropout. So that's the second way to deal with this problem. And the third way is something that I haven't managed to get it to work properly. With the proper tools that frame builders have, it should be achievable, but with DIY tools that you may have in your garage or at home or similar. For me it is very difficult to get a good result, and now I will try to explain why and hopefully get some good tips and ideas. Maybe there is a solution that I've missed. So, as I've shown in the video that I had mentioned at the start of this video, spreading the rear dropouts is relatively straightforward. You just look at that video, but the principle is that I use some sort of a threaded rod, and I start unscrewing the bolts with washers to not scratch the frame, so that it puts force and starts spreading the dropouts, and from time to time I stop, remeasure, and see if I've achieved the proper width. And then the next thing that I do is to make sure that the dropouts are parallel, which I do also with some tools that I've shown in that video and explained. And once I've made them parallel and to the required width, I can take a string like this, thread it somehow or tie it to the rear dropouts and tie it around the head tube, and then I can measure the distance between the saddle tube, seat tube, and the string on one end and on the other, and compare. If one of these dropouts is closer to the middle than the other, then depending on what is the width that I'm going to target, whether I've overshot it a bit or undershot it a bit, I will either insert. I always use a big lever, but I use it either like this, insert it, let's show it from this side. Okay, I can insert it like this and insert pressure pulling from here to widen one dropout, or I can insert it the other way around. I would have to remove the mud guards on this bicycle to do that, but it would go through here so that I can use the force to make it narrower. So, but that is the basic principle, and that is easily done because I have a relatively fixed, rigid structure here. I have good reference points in 3 dimensions, so they don't move. Generally, this part of the frame will not be deformed. And also, very important, I cannot move a dropout any closer or any further from the bottom bracket, generally. I can move it aside, but I cannot move it any closer because I cannot compress or expand the distance, the length of these tubes of chainstays. And that is very important, and that is one of the trickiest parts of making the spread of the front or fork legs or front dropouts be efficient, because if I start spreading them using a similar method as I've explained, they might end up with one fork being a bit further to the side than the other. That is one problem, and there is also another, but let's address this one first. In order to measure which one is more distanced, I could use some sort of a fixed aperture at the top, and then use like a keyhole method, or like you do when you are aiming a rifle, to see if it is aligned, or place something in parallel if they are not all around and smooth like this. It's a bit tricky, but that can be done generally. That's not too much of a problem. But the big problem, for me at least, is to be able to make sure that one of these hasn't moved a bit further forward or backward compared relative to the other. Because if either one fork is a bit more to the side or a bit more to the front or to the back from completely parallel, that will make the wheel be put at sort of an angle when it's in the fork, and it will affect steering very badly, and the bicycle will not go nicely when you let the handlebars go. It will always be trying to steer in one direction. And trying to get that alignment well within 1 millimeter. 1 millimeter is a huge difference that noticeably and drastically affects handling, at least in my opinion. And that is for me very difficult to achieve in my garage with the tools and the knowledge and the skills that I have. So that is the last option. As I like to joke, I haven't tried this enough time to make it statistically viable. So we're talking thousands. No, I haven't done thousands of those conversions. So it's a bit of like a tale from what I've tried and what I've heard other mechanics tried. And I like to joke that it is a procedure. If you haven't got the proper frame building tools, where you have about 40% of chance to succeed and 100% chance to ruin the fork. If a fork is okay to be replaced, if the owner says it's okay, or if it's my bicycle, if I'm happy to risk it, I will give it a try. It might work, it might not. And then if it doesn't work and I'm not able to get the steering properly working, I will replace the fork. So in my opinion, it's a bit of a risky situation, and again, I'm hoping to get good advice and corrections if that is easily or practically done with some homemade tools without building some apertures or structure just for that. That will take a lot of storage room, because this is not something that I do every month. So, and that's it. So another thing that can cause you headache and problems with classic old bicycles, so I wanted to address it, and that's it. Thank you very much for watching, and cheers. If you like this video, you can click on subscribe and choose this bell option, select all, so you get notified whenever I upload a new video.